The following episode of Right Pack Radio, in which you are about to listen to, aired originally on March 9th, 2014, where it was recorded in front of a live audience at a local bookstore. This episode actually is part one of a two-part episode called Traditional versus Self versus Hybrid Publishing. At the time in which this episode is being recorded, the idea of being a hybrid publisher or a hybrid published author was something that had just become brand new as a new choice or path that a writer could take. Prior to 2014, give or take on the year, that option was not available to authors. Stay tuned for the following episode, and we hope that you enjoy it. Writers, agents, and publishers, for the first time since the Gutenberg Press, find themselves lost in a maze of mystery as technology alters the shape of the publishing industry. Searching for Answers is a group of writers throwing pop culture, writing, and publishing into a crucible of clarity, passion, and humor. This group is the Right Pack. Welcome to Right Pack Radio. This is David Allen Lucas, your host for tonight. I am a writer of mystery, horror, science fiction, and poetry.
Hello, I'm Kathleen Kayembe. I write under the pen name Kaseka Invita, GLBT Romance.
And Kathleen is the co-host and moderator.
Hi.
I'm Jennifer Stolzer, illustrator, YA fantasy author, and jack of all trades.
Hi, I'm Peter Green. I write biography, particularly historical biography, World War II, and social history, and mystery.
Brad Cook. I am an author, publisher at Blank Slate Press, and president of St. Louis Writers Guild. You can find out more at blankslatepress.com, and we are open to submissions.
I am Melanie Claney. I write science fiction, fantasy, and nonfiction.
Okay. Tonight is an interesting topic. Tonight, if the listener has been watching the various blogs, there is basically a civil war occurring inside the writing industry. It's a civil war between traditional publishing and the self-published world. A little bit of history about writing that comes into light with this. In ancient days, writers were paid to come and perform their works with what we would today call the one percenters. They sometimes had to pay for their own work to be written because it was transcribed by many scribes, and sometimes they had supporters who would pay for it. This continued on through the medieval times up until about the time of the Gutenberg Press, at which time the books left those lands of what we call the one percenters and finally started showing up in the hands of those who are your common everyday person. About that time, newspapers, magazines, and book publishing became what we know as traditional publishing, and we would know that as such all the way up till today. In the 1920s, give or take, all the way up through roughly the 70s or 80s, we had paperback books that were looked down upon. If you want to be considered to be a true published author, you were in hardbacks only, or you sold the hardback, and maybe the paperback might come out. This was a time of the wood press, or otherwise known as a wood pulp. Many of your favorite authors nowadays came out of that. Some of them have passed away, but let me throw out some famous ones. Take, for example, Earl Stanley Gardner, who wrote Perry Mason and had the world's record for the most number of books published in the most languages. And you had others as well, and mostly this was mystery and horror, science fiction as well. Isaac Asimov was in there. And now, with the advent starting in the 80s and especially taking off in 2000s, we have the electronic publishing. And that has become the new Gutenberg Press. Brad.
Well, what David's kind of referring to in terms of what's going on now, and you can call it a war if you want, like prefer a lively discussion. But essentially what's been going on is that for several years there's been, changes in the industry, and the top professionals, the guys up in New York and stuff, came out with what they considered these three tiers, and they were put into in a blog in kind of a really nice, interesting and creative way, as writers do. But basically, essentially compared to the classes on an airplane. This prompted a response, of course, and it was quite a lively response that came back in the form of a blog that did interview the original, and cited many, many sources, and then came out some earnings reports from other self-taught authors in response to that as well, claiming about all the money they'd made and how traditional publishing was broken and all, continuing an argument that's been going on for some time. And essentially now there have been blogs back and forth. Both sides, the numbers have been proven right, the numbers have been proven wrong. There's been this opinion and that opinion thrown around. You can find them all over the place, and I'm sure David's going to put in a bunch of links around with this. But essentially what's been going on is a decision as to how valuable or at what part of the industry do you fit into, and trying to identify the new publishing world, if you want to call it that. And that's doing it in the nicest possible way possible.
Agreed. And I'm one of those writers that looks to both sides of that house for publishing purposes.
Well, I think, I think
fine.
in this modern day, we're going to see a lot more. I mean, they call it the hybrid author now, and that's one of the things that's being discussed, but I don't think anyone can reject any one media.
No, I think it would be suicide, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And I think in the way I'm looking at the self-pubs and even the micro-pubs, that is your new pulp fiction file. Now, it doesn't always have to be fiction, but that's your pulp genre nowadays.
Well, the ebook really is the new paperback. That's so weird to say, but it is true. Your analogy before about the hardback coming out and then would come out the paperback. I mean, that was the publishing model for a very long time, and now the model is we release the book and then you release an ebook, and they sit kind of with each other. So.
I was kind of thinking of ebooks as books you might want to reread them, but you don't care about keeping them. Ebooks are what you get when you don't care about them signed. You don't want to pass them on to anybody else because, frankly, you're not allowed to at this point, which is a problem with them. But if you're just going to, if you're just going to buy it, read it, and then frankly, if I just want to buy it and not keep it, or read it, not keep it, I go to the library. But
Yeah.
Well, on the subject of ebooks and along that vein, I was wondering what the difference, I guess, between big publishing, like traditional publishing, versus the smaller presses, because in queer romance, a lot of the fiction that's being published is published as an ebook, first or only as an ebook.
Right.
And
a lot of niche markets are like that.
Yeah, it's where your readership is.
And
I can talk a little bit about that.
And before I turn it over to Peter, because I do want to hear, you've got a unique situation with what you've been through in your writing industry, but what you said about that niche going straight to e-publishing, and that's not unlike the old wood pulps where a lot of times the authors just went straight to paperback and that was it, and it was only out for a very short time.
Yeah. One of the highlights of recent blogs has been a blog by Joe Conrath, who's a very successful author of 40 books, and a lot of this has happened in the last 6 years. It's unbelievable. I met Joe in 2008 when he was just selling his first urban fantasy mysteries. This one I've got in my hand is called Dirty Martini, and it was put out by Hyperion Press, which has now been acquired by Hachette Book Group, which is one of the big five. Used to be the big six, but Penguin acquired Random House. And the other three are Simon & Schuster, Macmillan, and HarperCollins.
Let me pause just a second. There was also another big one that was out for a while that got folded during the last recession, and Dorchester?
Dorchester?
Yeah.
I think you're right, yeah.
Well, there used to be 6, and now they're 5.
Yeah.
And they work on the classic model of working only with agents. They really don't take anything over the transom. They have to be vetted by a literary agent, and have this wasteful publishing system where they overprint, they overdistribute, and then they end up taking back and destroying the ones that can't be sold. And they were very late coming into ebooks, and they're playing catch up. And the way Joe Conrath puts it, it's an issue of class war and revolution in the book industry, and he didn't coin that phrase. It was Donald Mass, the very prominent literary agent, who coined that phrase. And the question is, okay, you got class war, but who are the royals and who are the peasants? Now, Donald Mass thinks, well, the peasants are the writers. There's 3 classes of them. There's the freight class, access is easy to ebooks, to writing them and publishing them. Success is rare. But as Joe Conrath points out, it's always rare. It takes an unusual kind of initiative to really make something put over the top, and usually that's the author's initiative. There's Coach Class. It's decent literary fiction or well-crafted commercial fiction. And then there's First Class. Hardcover sells for $25, $30. And then it extends its life in the bookstore by being reissued in trade paper for $15. And so it has this double life, and he's very impressed by all the money you can make. But of course, the author doesn't really make much out of that. If he makes 12.5%, he's lucky. Now, the new model, the writer can make as much as 70%, minus a few very minor expenses. And that goes to markets all over the world.
They're not that minor of expenses.
Yeah, well, okay, so it's 60. But
it costs several $1,000s to produce a book. And that cost, it's about who ferries that cost.
Right.
And a traditional publisher, they're the ones who hold that cost. And for a self-publisher, they're the ones who, front that cost.
No
and that
question
really is the difference between the two models.
But what about small press publishers? Again,
Right.
because I was thinking about the music industry and how, oh no, all the big record companies are getting undermined by MP3s and digital music. And a lot of people, I think, are more able to, I want to say publish, but it's not that, to release their music without being signed by a huge label. And I think that's very similar to what a lot of writers can do now, because we don't have to go to the big five or whatever.
Well, and like you've said that, it costs several $1,000s to get a book professionally. That's the key here. Coming out, you can get it for a lot cheaper if you're either really good at doing all those steps or it doesn't look all that great.
Right. Yeah, but then you've created an inferior product.
Right. So, but I'm saying that...
And if, the point is to create, a professional product that you can sell in any store around town.
But the point is, for less than $10,000, you can get a book out, and if you sell 300 copies, you're not going to make back your money. Well, maybe if you sell them for enough.
See, and
you won't make back your money.
No, that's the new gatekeeper.
Yeah.
In the self-publishing world, the new gatekeeper is money.
Right.
But Joe Conrath points out that, okay, you pay for these services up front, but you're paying for them, and you don't have to split your profits forever after.
Yeah, but it's a long time, but ever if you get profits.
Well, and let me go with that for a second. One of the big differences, as the listeners hearing, let's take a look at traditional publisher route. Brad's already laid it out as far as how to get published. Okay, you are a author, and this is true of fiction and nonfiction. You're the author. You somehow got signed. Congratulations. We're living in a fantasy world here for a second.
Being writers and all.
Yeah, being writers and all, we all like fantasy. But anyway, you are now signed up. It's going to take time for your book to get on the shelf. Actually, that's up to 2 years to get out on that shelf, because it's going to go through various editing stages. And a lot of times the editors don't do what we think of as editing nowadays. They're looking at more how the book comes together.
There are different types of editors.
There are different types of editors, and I don't want to play this. But anyway, you go through various different editing stages. You go through what's called the galleys, which is your pictures on your book cover. And then you get published. And in that publishing, you get, quote-unquote, some advertising money. And I underline that, and I circle that, and I laugh at that. Because unless you are one of the higher names, the first class section down on Mass's hierarchy. Thank you. You are actually, your level of advertising is you get put into a catalog that the bookstores and that the libraries can choose from. That's not getting you out in front of the entire mass of readers. So let's talk about the online world. Now you're looking at having to get onto Amazon and Barnes & Noble, which the traditional publisher will do for you. They'll put you out there, and you have got to hope that someone finds your books. And in that process, you as a writer need to be out there advertising yourself, pushing yourself. You are a business.
Yes, that never changes.
That never
doesn't
changes.
change if you're a top-class author all the way down.
Exactly. Look at
Patterson. He does some amazing... he just gave money to every bookstore in America, practically. So.
I mean, okay, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
money.
Robin's over there going, can I get some of that Patterson money?
Yes, and...
So, Patterson, if you're listening, STL Books could really use some.
And let me explain. We are recording at STL Books, and Robin is the owner. And she's attending this conference, this recording. And talking about advertising, just real brief, since you through Patterson, how many people have seen the TV show Castle? Patterson does not need to be on Castle, but he sits at a poker table with Nathan Fillion's character playing poker and talking mysteries. So that he's there advertising. He's got his name out there. Now, self-publishing. Some self-publishers don't believe that you need an editor. My opinion, edit like crazy.
Yes, always get an editor. Please.
Always get an editor. Your critique unless your critique partner is a professional editor,
Even then, get another editor.
Exactly. Brad and I truly agree on a lot of things.
At the very least, get someone to edit that hasn't read all the different drafts.
Amen.
Yeah.
A brand new set of eyes.
In my bill-paying job, I do a lot of writing that is very boring for most people, and I can tell you, being the writer, I can't catch the mistakes that I've done. You've got to have somebody who's got a jaundiced eye to take a look at it. Okay, but the self-publisher is required to get their own book galleys. They've got to get the book out there, and usually it's just electronic publishing, but they've got to get it out there. If they do a hard book, and when I say hard book, I'm not saying hardcover. I mean a physical book, be it paperback or hardcover. They've got to walk into the various bookstores and ask the owners, like Robin, hey, would you please put my book up? And Robin, and no, I'm not turning you into the villain, but a lot of the bookstore owners aren't going to care about the book if you are not out there beating the path to have readers come to get your book.
Do you already have a readership? What's your platform?
Thank you. Go for it.
Oh.
You fed into it.
I'm sorry.
No.
Okay, so I hear a lot about writers needing to do a lot of publicity for their work. And I think that's also true for big publishers, or at least the Writing and Publishing for Dummies book was like, you should hire your own publicist anyway, because otherwise you would get lost.
It is a wonderful thing to do.
Yeah.
And usually a publicist comes in a short-term, package deal. They're going to
right
represent
after your
you
book
for the
is
certain
released,
weeks.
and around that time is when you need it most.
Yeah, and if you can afford it, they can be wonderfully helpful. You can do all that work yourself. And see, that's really what this comes down to, is a decision. Do you want a team behind you so that you can email a team of people if you have questions or anything like that? Or are you doing it all yourself? Are you hiring the people yourself? Are you doing all this work yourself, the marketing? And you can do either way, really. I mean, and to be honest, you probably should be doing both, because not every publisher is going to want to publish everything you write.
Exactly.
But not everything you write should be published. Some of us have those
But we live in a
things that-
different world now where everything you write can be published no matter if it should or not.
And I read a
There was
piece
a
of
great
wisdom
quote about
today
that.
saying the more books you publish, the more you'll sell.
The Robert Randisi effect.
Yeah, exactly.
And unless
also
one of
the-
those books is so bad, no one ever wants to read anything else.
Then you write another book that's good, and
With a
then
new
that
pen
just
name.
becomes that famous book that everyone's going to read because it's
Let's
so
call it
bad.
Jean-Claude Van
Unrelated.
Dammeism.
Exactly.
He does a whole lot
Unrelated.
of garbage, and then he does something fabulous, and then suddenly everyone loves him.
On a related note, Brad's clapping for that.
Dave
was
is
clapping.
clapping.
Dear heavens.
I love Van Damme. But, not that
I
much.
don't. I just like the allegory there.
Yeah.
Oh my. So sorry.
That's okay.
I think some of this depends on what your aim is in publishing in the first place. Because I'm a writer because I like writing. I am not good at spending a lot of time on social media because I will spend a day on there and wonder where it went. And juggling that is really hard for me. And moreover, we're on the radio. I would feel a lot worse and more nervous if I were sitting in front of a camera. So a lot of us are shrinking violets. We don't necessarily like being in the spotlight. We like our work there. And if you have to do all the publicity yourself and to market yourself, that's turning on a whole different part of your personality that you may or may not actually have in your personality.
I'm remembering a story. I might have been a Murder, She Wrote. I mean, it was a TV thing. I don't remember. But one of the subplots or whatever is the author was somebody else, but they had basically the vivacious person that was pretending to be the author of all the books and doing all the publicity and signing all the books and all that.
Wasn't
where
that
the
an
other
80s
person
TV
was.
show?
They do that
Okay,
with singers too. 200 Pound Beauty, Korean romance drama kind of thing, adorable. The singer ends up basically getting a body overhaul so that she can actually be in front of the stage instead of behind it singing for the cute little pop star or whatever who's not actually singing.
The fact is that no matter what kind of writer you end up being, if you are traditional, if you're a hybrid, or if you are going down the road of self-pub, you have got to be able to step out of your comfort zone. You are an entrepreneur. If you aren't trying to be an entrepreneur at this, you're not in the right game. And I'm not saying you're out to make money on doing it, though that's the idea. Is,
We all like to
we
make
all like
money.
to make a living. And I'm going to sidebar. One of the links I'm going to put out there, as Brad said, I'm going to put a whole bunch of links out. One of the I believe he was self-published. Don't hold that to me, but one of the people was on Amazon's top 10 selling list for several weeks on a row as number 6. And his whole family's going, oh, hey, you're on there for one more week and we can afford the big cars and all that. And he was embarrassed to tell his family, as I think we all are, about how much he was actually making. Now, as in that area of the top 6 or top 10 of any publishing list, or any selling list, you would think these people are making lots of money. He was bringing home $12,000 a year from writing. It's not that much. And with that, I'm going to say, going back to being an entrepreneur, you do need to have a team behind you. Either a team of one, yourself, where you're able to do it all. You need to hire somebody, which then you're splitting the profits. Even if you're paying them money and not having a contract to split the profit, you're still losing your percentage of the 70% or 60% or whatever, because that's return on investment. And then you better listen to your team. I have read many articles, many blogs about where publicists or agents, they want to get the writer out in front of people. They want the writer to go get on a talk show, do something, and they set it up, and the writer doesn't show up. They became very difficult to work with, and you have to wonder, why is your book not selling? Same thing with the book signing that you go to. If somebody's at Barnes and Noble and they're signing a book, or even at an independent bookstore, which, by the way, I love independent bookstores, but with the independent bookstores, if you're sitting there and you're knitting, or you're sitting there and you're just looking around and you're not trying to push your book, not being annoying with it, but you're not trying to push your book, then you have to blame only one person for your book not selling.
That's right. And, I think the trend nowadays has definitely been in the direction of quality. Brad, you mentioned it has to be good quality in order to attract serious attention. So I think the independent authors are getting much smarter than perhaps the first crop was 10, 20 years ago. And they're putting out high-quality books. They're doing high-quality marketing. And I mentioned Donald Mass's view of the thing, and he took apart a recent blog by Donald Mass, Joe Conrath did, point by point. He calls it Fisking, named after some professor named Robert Fisk. But anyway, he took apart what he said. He says authors create the system and they should own it, at least to some extent. And the best thing is, like, some of our members are hybrid authors, so they can do some of the mass distribution and some of the self-promotion and distribution. Joe Conrath is a pretty good example. He's a pretty good urban fantasy writer, but that's not the point. In the past 5 years, his hard work at promotion and self-publishing has turned him from just another member of the author herd, as Donald Mass calls them, to an entrepreneur who earned 8 times the revenue from his ebooks as he did, and not print books, as he did when he was a captive of Hyperion Press. And he is a millionaire besides. He says his income tax is now way larger than his original revenues from all his previous traditionally published books.
One thing, and I don't want to sound like everybody's being up on Donald out there. I actually listened to Donald Mass at a Pacific Northwest writing conference where he was a keynote speaker. And he was talking in front of us and various editors and agents, and I'm trying to remember if Penguin was there and so forth, but the high levels were there. And he was talking about how agents need a change in this growing industry, this changing industry. Donald does know his industry. He's one of the top agents. He does know what he's talking about, and I don't disagree with some of the things he's saying. It's just you have to realize that if you are going to go self-pub, or if you're going to be a mid-list, not where I think we all as writers want to fantasize we will be that top writing class. But the fact is, we're not going to make it there.
Well, the fact is, that's 1% of the industry. I mean, it really is. I mean, when you look at it, actually, the people you know most, who sit on most of the shelves, who get most of the sales, the Pattersons, the Custlers, those kind of guys, that is 1% of 1% of all the writers in the world. I mean, it's literally, so when you're shooting for that, you're literally shooting for the moon. I mean, most of us are going to enjoy a very lovely career in the mid-list. And really what this whole Mass and Conrad, argument is about the way in which you market books. Because Conrad's model is, I market myself as an author. And what Mayes is kind of saying, what traditional publishing tends to do, is to market the book. Because the book can reach more readers than the author. And Conrad's model is that readers are going to read what I write. So it's two very different views. And I think that's why they've been kind of diametrically opposed to each other. But, and there are a lot of other reasons too, but...
Yep.
I think the book is what is publicized until the author becomes their own brand. Like things with Neil Gaiman, Stephen King, like all these people you were talking about who are face out on the shelves in bookstores. We don't necessarily know what their next book is. We just know, oh my gosh, there's a new one in. I'm going to get that one.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And the kicker is that that's one way to market your book. And it's not a bad way to market your book. I mean, it's a very good way to market yourself as an author and as a brand. But also know that you need to, market the book that you're in. That book needs to reach readers who don't care who the author is. They care about the story. They care about the characters. They care... that's what a reader really cares about. Does he care about the publisher? Does he care about the author? Not really.
And
the characters, the story, those are the things that matter most to a reader.
I was just thinking series is kind of like the hybrid of that. I'll get the next book of this series.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's still selling the book, though.
It is selling the book, but it's sort of a little bit... The book has a brand rather than the author itself. But I was just thinking, Janet Ivanovich, I actually just, listened to one of her new audiobooks, but I think she's partnered with a lot of different authors. I don't know how much of the writing she's doing, but she's partnered with other one, and there are other books, so it's obviously her brand, her name that's selling the book. She's the lead author. But
that's getting
into
a whole
she's running it kind of like
like
a TV show. She's the
there's
show
that's
woman.
book packaging and a whole new kind of area of the book industry. I mean, Patterson and Cussler are now getting together to start to make books together and pump them out. So, I mean, this has been around forever. James Patterson, I don't even remember the last time he had a solo title come, where he was the only guy on the cover. So
we're talking about
now, those guys make good money too.
We're talking about big publishing, traditional publishing, small press, and self-publishing. But what about the other ways of publishing? I don't know, non-traditional ways of publishing. Like, for example...
like FedEx? Office?
No.
Like books on demand?
Books on demand would be one. Like Kickstarter.
Space.
Yeah, all sorts of things like that.
That's
And,
self-publishing.
Yeah.
You have
There's
other things
also-
like, so Scribd is something you can use. It's a PDF publisher. It's an online thing. We use it in St. Louis Writers Guild for The Scribe, which I highly recommend. It's a literary magazine. Check it out. But anyway... It is, it's something that you can put out there. You can charge for the PDFs. You can not. A lot of magazines go on there. A lot of papers and other, academic stuff go on there. It's a whole thing. But that's still publishing. That's still self-publishing. It's still e-publishing.
Yeah.
I was thinking along the lines of Shadow Unit specifically. It is for lack of a better descriptor, it is a paranormal crime TV show, but it is a series of novellas, and it's published online. And there are ebooks for it too.
There's that new site, and forgive me for not knowing the name on the top of my head, but it is a serial site. So you literally upload your next chunk every so often to this site, and then people go there and they read it in a serial format.
Yeah.
Now, my personal belief is that may not be the best route to go to get it. I mean, maybe it's a great way to get discovered. Maybe it's the best way to go. I would argue to actually gather that all together and send it off to a publisher and get published, or send it out and
I don't know. It kind of reminds me of how a lot of Dickens was published, in the newspapers before you gathered it together.
Yeah, but
Dickens
there are ways you can do that too, like
Dumas.
being published in journals and other things like that. But I advocate trying to get paid for everything you're publishing.
And just real quick, I can't think of the name of the site either, but I also know Amazon also has a serial site as well. Go ahead.
I meant more along the lines of, how do you publish something, get work out there, that there is no standard way of publishing yet?
Well, look at poets, and I'm not picking on poets here, but poet books, there are a bunch of them. They come in a variety of formats, from traditionally published, perfect bound with great covers, to, folded over pieces of paper that have staples in the center.
Chapbooks.
Chapbooks and stuff. And, are any of those bad? No. And, to be honest, it's getting your poetry out there. I mean, I've seen some beautiful works where they hand draw and do each cover individually as a painting. I can't even imagine doing that, but to produce 50 or so of them, that doesn't seem too bad for them.
And also, too, with poets, there's now also slam poetry.
Yeah.
In which you don't actually have published poetry necessarily. The person gets up in front of the mic and recites their poem. Usually it's memorized, or they're inventing it right there in front of you, and that's another form of publishing.
Epic rap battles. YouTube.
One way.
You know, the thing that Conrad likes to point out about the contrast between traditional and self-publishing is that the real peasants in this situation are not the folks that are out there self-publishing, but the mid-list authors that are stuck with long-term contracts and nothing much is happening with the book. The publisher certainly isn't doing much with it, but they can't get out of the contracts, and so that's...
Well, see, now I would have an argument there that that's about your publisher, and you should probably check out your publisher before you get signed.
Yeah.
As a traditional publisher, I can tell you that, the reason it takes 9-10 months to get a book out. Why does it take that long? Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff. We got to get you into a catalog months ahead of time. We got to go through the book, and it's going to go through at least 2 or 3 people. It's got to have a cover. We've got to go through all that, and then we get you lined up. Now, after that, we're going to promote you as much as we can, and we're going to promote you everywhere we can. But it's also up to the author at that point.
Right.
And it always is. And that's the kicker. Like, I'm at a very small press. We have a very tiny marketing budget as is. But even if you're up with the big boys, you're not going to get the giant displays and everywhere across unless you're that 1% of 1%. And then you're going to get it.
Well,
So
the problem I've run across sometimes looking for specific books is that they're out of print, but the publisher still has the right to them.
True.
Yeah.
And one thing real fast, though, is let's look at the other side of that coin. Be it self-publisher, be it with a micropress, be it with a traditional press. You buy an electronic book. Okay, those technically don't go out of print too easily.
no, and that should be available, forever
should
and ever.
be.
They never should go away.
But one thing you may not realize is when you buy a book electronically, you're really not buying it.
No, you're renting it.
You're renting it.
Yeah.
So that's something to think about as well. Unlike the solid books, you actually don't have anything on a permanent basis.
There have also been times when the content's been pulled and pushed back out, changed. And the kicker is, and this is the other one, this is going to the model of why you would go with a big traditional house over, say, going it your own road. It's easier if you go through a big house to, say, get into Walmart or one of the big giant box stores where a heck of amount of sales take place. But beyond that, going international, yes, it is totally possible to go international as a self-published author. It is more difficult than if you have an agent who has a sub-right agent within their own agency. And then they're going to do all that for you. Your movie rights, your book, your large print rights, all the subsidiary rights. And to be honest, that's where Conrad made a lot of his money, was not in each individual sale, but in the sale of his rights. Mm-hmm. It's a big way for authors to make money. And you, as of now, still pretty much have to go through a big, agency to get access to that. And part of the reason is they are the gatekeepers. I mean, Donald said it in his blog that did he want to be a gatekeeper? Maybe not, but that's where he sits.
Yeah. Well, and yours is a good small press. I've read a couple of books, and they're excellent quality and very good. My current reason for going independent, and I just put a book up on Amazon today.
Hey, there you go.
Thank you. It's a rewrite of my first book, Ben's War with. It's called now Ben's War with the U.S. Marines, and I was told by 67 agents that they couldn't sell this book, and then I discovered. But it's a funny thing. I sell this book wherever I go. I've sold probably 150 of them. I meet veterans. I meet people who are interested in this stuff, or have military families, or want the social history of the 1940s. And they got it there, and they're fascinated with this stuff, even young people today. So for this particular book, I knew no agent was ever going to take it, and I want to be a hybrid publisher as badly as anybody else.
And see, that's the beauty of it, is that you should be.
Hybrid author.
There's no reason in today's day and age that Ben's War with the U.S. Marines should not come out. There's no reason. But and as you say, with traditional publishers and with agents, they never would have taken it. And never in a million years.
Told me to my face, I can't can't sell that
They
book.
can't sell it. But to be honest, you can. And that's the beauty part of being a hybrid author.
That's a side effect of the way things are nowadays, is that everyone's book can come out.
Exactly.
And that leaves room for the big five to be a little bit...
They have turned over the mid-list. They don't care about the
They don't
mid-list.
care
They
about
used to have to
small
fill it
people
out.
anymore.
They used to have to devote imprints and all kinds of... Well, they used to have to devote a huge chunk of their own resources to putting books out in the mid-list. Books that they knew weren't going to sell, because, the Donald Mays' thing is all about sales. A self-published book is only going to sell so many copies. A mid-list book is only going to sell so many more copies, and until you're up at like 50,000 books, 100,000 books, you're not up in the giant big boy, it's 1%ers league. And so that's kind of what he's, where the breakdown really comes down. So, I don't know.
Yeah. And the other issue is time.
Yes.
I don't have another 10 years to horse around with a whole bunch of agents and wait a year for somebody to want it and then wait another year or two for somebody to actually put it into print. Whereas I can do this
But here's another
immediately.
thing. You're selling it directly to readers.
Exactly.
When the agent says he can't sell it, I'm assuming
It's
he's
to
saying
publishing
that,
houses.
I'm saying that he can't sell it to publishing
Well, it's to publishing houses, and it's also, they know, the buyers. So the buyers from Barnes & Noble, the buyers from Walmart, those are the people, because that's who's reading those catalogs that you're getting stuck, as a traditionally published author, when you're getting put into a catalog, that's who that's going to. It's going to all those buyers. And if those buyers don't want it, if that's not something they want, then they know there's no point in putting it in the catalog, and there's a lot of books out there, wonderful books, that, are never going to make worldwide distribution.
Well, one thing Donald said in his blog is, by getting rid of the mid-list, by pushing this off, it now frees up the big five to look for the higher risk, higher return type stories like Hunger Games and so forth. They're out there.
Everyone's going to want, they will always focus on the big sellers. And to that end, readers will always dictate what is going to be the next big thing. They always have, and they always will. Yes, you can put a dozen books in front of a reader and say, these are the books you're going to love, but it's up to the readers to say, this is the book I love, because to this day, the best thing that sells a book is word of mouth. Having a dozen people say, I love this book, and you have to read it, is still the best marketing campaign for an author you can have. And yes, getting rid of the mid-list has really helped that, but the mid-list really has done is opened up to small presses. Small presses and imprints, and then successful self-publisher. That's the mid-list. That's who's there in the mid-list. And to be honest, we're all going to sit there and have wonderful little careers in the mid-list because, and we're going to sell a lot of books, and we're going to sell, a bunch of books, but I don't know. I don't think it's that bad to be in the mid-list. I don't think it's that wrong. Yeah.
Most of
Reading,
us are going to be in there. If we're lucky, we hope.
Reading Donald's article makes it sound like being not in first class is being less of an author.
And I think that's
being
what
less
really angered
successful.
Howery and Conrath and those guys, was they felt somehow he was slighting them. And in honesty, I think what he was saying is, this is the reality of the industry, and where you here it is, where do you fit into it? And I think they got caught up in the terminology he was using.
Well, no one likes to be told that they're less than what they are.
Exactly. And to be honest, there are self-publishing superstars, and there always will be. But guess what? They're the 1% of the 1% of self-publishing.
Right.
So, on that note, though, how do you think the publishing industry has affected what is and isn't successful as a book? Quote-unquote successful. Because there are books that have gone out of print that through word of mouth people have wanted back in print because it was amazing, but the book wasn't successful according to the big publishers in terms of numbers and sales.
Well, see, and that's what the big publishers really care about, is numbers and sales. And
Yes.
more numbers. They care more about how many units did we sell, and how many units did you sell, because that's an indicator to them of how many units you're going to sell in your next book, and that's an indicator of how much money they need to spend on you.
but
Think of
that's
it
not
like a cult classic, because, for instance, cult classic TV shows, they might be great shows, and they might, quality-wise, be better than the most popular reality TV or whatever, but somehow if they're not getting the numbers, they might be what everyone's reading in 50 years and 100 years. But for instance...
Firefly.
Yeah.
Family Guy.
Well, no, okay,
Actually,
take it away from
Family
TV, because
Guy's
TV
not-
doesn't work, because
no,
TV has
I
a
thought
total
they
way
took
of
it
bringing
off
it back.
for-
But for
Speed
books,
drama.
Future
Hold on,
world, sorry.
4 books. When you're talking about books people are going to be reading in 100 years, it's generally the most successful books of the day. Those are the books that are going to make it and continue on. Now, not always, but a lot of times. So in 100 years, people are probably going to be reading Hunger
50
Games.
Shades of Grey.
Let's hope not.
I don't know of anyone that's read a Radcliffe novel. She was huge in Victorian England, but we've all read Emily Dickinson, and she was a middle-list author not Emily Dickinson, Jane Austen, and she was a middle-list author.
Yeah, and I'm not saying
Related
all
to
of
that,
them,
though,
but
that's partly
Gatsby was a
school
huge seller in its day.
exposure. Like a lot of books that are on the New York Times bestseller list are there because they have the kind of publicity behind them that can get them on there in the first place, so that they do get the exposure, so that they do get word of mouth.
Right, and the one thing that the big publishers can do is distribution.
Yes.
They over-distribute, but by golly, you can get that book in half a dozen places in any city or town. So that's the big
okay.
advantage they have.
when print on demand and the espresso machine totally comes into its own, we will have a whole new industry to deal with where you can just walk in and get any book you want.
That's
So,
really the point, is that we're in the middle right now.
Yeah.
You know, we're still in a world where the
We're-
conveniences of modern publishing, of self and on-demand publishing are there, but we're still being told, and perhaps rightly, because the way it goes, that going through having physical books in a physical store, internationally distributed by a big publishing company, that's the only way to have, air quotes, success.
There are plenty
But
of
there's-
people that won't touch an ebook.
There's a lot of, there's someday being able to go online and order that book and have it printed and mailed to you is going to be the only way to get your book.
You don't even have to order it online. Just order it online, walk into the bookstore, and it'll be right there waiting for you in 5 minutes later. I mean, that's the beauty part of the future. I mean, if there's one thing you can guarantee about this industry, in 5 years, everything will be different.
Right. But one thing won't be. And that is, as a writer, if your goal is to get published and get out there and get readership, which readership equals sales and money coming in, you have got to put yourself out there. You've got to think like, this is my business. You have to think like an entrepreneur. You can't just sit back and, I've got a book and now I'm going to sit it out there and everybody's going to find it somehow and they're going to read it. We've all have run into those writers, and we know how that happens, and we know that's a path to failure. You have to have, as Kathleen was talking about earlier, a platform. You've got to have something, push that book out.
Well, it doesn't have to be yourself, though.
Doesn't have
if
to
you're
be
not
yourself.
comfortable being in the public eye, I understand that entirely. But sometimes, it depends on the book you're writing. If you're writing a nonfiction book, then you definitely need to be the one who's on the platform, because your validity is what makes your book valid.
Yes.
But
Unless you have a surrogate to do that for you.
Yeah.
Right.
The in the fiction world, like, there are, we've mentioned authors that everyone knows, J.K. Rowling, Stephen King. I mentioned 50 Shades of Grey earlier as a joke, but everyone knows what that is. And some people can name the author, but it was what was in that book that made it popular.
Yeah.
It was what it was in that book that made people who would never read that book do news reports
The same
about
thing
it.
is true with Harry Potter. I mean, it's not the fact that J.K. Rowling was making billions of dollars that made people want to read that book. It was the fact that it was an awesome story about this amazing kid in his totally cool school that made people want to read this book. And that's why I was saying that marketing the book is important, because stories are timeless. Books are immortal. I mean, that's the beauty of it.
In the self-publishing world, just selling to people who know you as a human, that will get you, 300 sales.
Yeah.
But to go beyond that sphere, to the people that don't know who you are and don't care who you are and never will care
Nope.
who you are,
They
that's
just
when
love
you
your
need to
story.
sell your book. You need to sell both, because you've got 300 sales of people that are your friends. And you're going to sell your book to people based on the fact that you had a nice conversation with them in a coffee shop.
Yep.
But that's going to be that's just a part. You got to do both of them.
Yes, but when are you getting everybody who walks into a Barnes & Noble across this country, or any bookstore across this country, when you're having hundreds or thousands of people every day for those, release weeks or whatever, going in and picking up your book? And the question will always be, how are you that book? And right now the best way is to have an agent, traditional publisher, all that kind of route. Is that the only way?
I
No.
would argue.
With Brad's last statement, the discussion was only heating up rather than winding down. The Right Pack's time to record was over, but the topic wasn't. Stay tuned to Right Pack Radio as we dive deeper into the debate between traditional versus self versus hybrid publishing. Theme songs for Right Pack Radio were written and performed by Meredith Tate. All copyrights remain with her. Right Pack Radio would like to thank STL Books for allowing us to record in their office. STL Books is a online bookstore specializing in new and used high-quality literature, children's books, and books written by or about St. Louis. Please visit them online at www.stlbooks.com or find their store on the Amazon.com website.